Story 1. My husband and I live abroad and above a place of business. Our alarm company called us at 3 a.m. to say there was a motion detect alert, just one, in a weird place. We assumed it was just a mouse, but went to reset and check it out. Husband ended up face to face with a burglar who was on his way out the window that he broke into. He ran back inside, called emergency services, and we heard mass chaos going on in the depths of the building. So much crashing and smashing. The burglar climbed a 10-foot iron gate, bodily smashed through 2 sets of commercial-grade glass doors, and was outside again. My husband was like, "Duck this dude." Tore after him and tackled him, and he got him on the ground and pinned him. Bear in mind, the whole time I'm narrating to emergency services and chasing around in my panties and tank top. I was bit behind my husband and in the middle of the street about 15 feet away when a minivan squealed around the corner. It was his girlfriend/getaway driver. I luckily missed it. I was super focused on reading the license plate, which was one of those cutesy front out-of-state ones. And therefore hard to read, but she yelled, "Get the duck off him, or I'm running you over!" Then she tried to. The audio and video I had to watch for the trial was absolutely horrifying. I had blocked it out nearly completely and really did not remember how close it was. She guns the engine at me, and I throw my hands up in front of my face when I realize what she's doing and scream, and finally jump out of the way with inches to spare. He jumped in and off they went. He bled all over my husband, yikes, and eventually the DNA and the partial plate info nailed them. They're both in prison. Yeah, trial sucks. Story number 2. So, I, 18 female, back then, but now I'm 25, was on my way home at night after meeting a friend. I only live 10 minutes away from the train station. After a few minutes, I felt someone following me. No big deal, I thought. Just someone else walking home, but I started walking faster and realized the person behind me was catching up. Weird. In my head, I start to make up scenarios of how to defend myself if the person attacked. Never would I think this to actually happen. Well, until I felt something on the back of my head hitting me hard. I went furious. I turned around and attacked the guy. My mind was just full of anger towards this stranger who, what I thought, hit me. We were wrestling until I fell on the ground and he was sitting on top of me, strangling me. I tried to crawl my nails into his eyes as deep as I could, but I started to black out. Suddenly, there was this thought in my head, "Wake up or you will die." Well, adrenaline kicks in at that time, and I open my eyes and scream at the top of my lungs, attacking him again. Well, that helped. He stood up and began to run. I laid there for a few seconds, then I started to run home screaming. My mom was already at our door and opened for me because my screams woke her up, or her motherly senses, who knows. She immediately calls the cops, and they had him arrest him on the same night. It turned out he actually shot me in the back of the head. They assumed that the gun did not work properly. The bullet did not penetrate my skull and stuck in there. But as far as I know, they never found out why the gun misfired in the first place. I mean, I'm glad though. He told the cops that he already followed me a few times in the past, but he never had the guts to, quote, do it. He wanted to, well, hurt me and abuse my dead body. I know that's a wild story, and I have some Swiss newspaper articles as a source if anybody cares enough. Story number 3. I had a guy, he was on drugs and acid, and he broke into my apartment in college. Somehow, he was convinced he lost his glasses inside. So I'm doing my dishes when my door gets slammed open. Next thing I know, he is behind me and I'm being choked to death in my kitchen. As I was losing consciousness, I grabbed my roommate's acrylic bong and frantically swung over my shoulder into his face. Well, the bong broke, but it did nothing as the guy was choking me even harder, so I swung it again. Because the bong broke the first time, I was hitting the guy with a 6-inch claw of acrylic glass. Afterwards, his scalp and part of his cheek were hanging off the side of his face. Essentially, I scalped him with a bong. So I chase the guy out of my house, and there's easily 2 feet of snow outside. He tries walking back to his house through a cemetery shortcut. Seriously, how ironic. And he passes out in the cemetery. The police only found him because I called the cops and they followed the blood trail and footprints through the snow. And that's the part I was surprised about the most. I hit the guy on his scalp. There isn't much blood in a scalp compared to most of the body, but my kitchen was absolutely covered. His blood was on my refrigerator, counter, floor, ceiling. It was almost as traumatic to clean it. My roommates were gone for winter break. Thank goodness my roommate's girlfriend came over and helped me. Now, as for the guy, the cops could not charge him for 2 days because he needed blood transfusions. He was charged with assault, breaking and entering, and attempted murder. And he definitely had drugs on him too. Not sure what he got convicted of, but he went to jail for 4 years. Story number 4. I was a lead man at a factory. A girl starts working there, and I take an interest. After a few months, I find out she's in a terrible drug-fueled abusive relationship. Every night I tell her to call me, I'll come get her. Finally, after months, she calls me. I come to get her and take her to my house. The guy she was in the relationship with did not take too kindly to me taking her away. He spends the next 2 years harassing and threatening us. A few months after she and I got married, we went out for a few drinks. Her ex just happened to be at the bar we went to. He apologized to us for the threats and harassment. We were sitting outside talking with a few other people, and next thing I know, I'm on the back on my ground with someone choking me. I try all I can to get them off me, but being blindsided by them being on top of me, it was not easy. As I struggle to get free, everything absolutely goes black. Then I see, quote, the light at the end of the tunnel. In that moment, I was certain that this was the end of me, and I somehow managed to get better hold of the person's head. And I yank them off of me, and we run to the car and get away. A week or so later, my wife had been talking to everyone she thinks might know what happened. Turns out, her ex had paid 2 people $50 to hurt me that night. Story number 5. I was doing volunteer work in Central America, working in a really bad area of the capital city. It was a slum built on top of the city's garbage dump. The whole place reeked of trash, and there was large metal cylinders coming up out the ground throughout the area to vent the gas from decomposing garbage underground. As a fellow volunteer, I would walk down the dirt at the path. 2 men approached us, and I've never seen them before. They were acting very, very strange. But I just thought that they were drunk or, well, on drugs. A lot of people in that area drank rubbing alcohol to get drunk, since it was cheaper than beer or liquor. Over time, drinking the rubbing alcohol would really mess with their brain. As the men got closer, they began acting really friendly, and I mean too friendly. One of them came close to me, trying to put his arm around my shoulder, and at first it seemed like the behavior of a guy who gets happy and friendly when he's drunk. However, an alarm went off in my head, red alert, and I gently but firmly push him away. I tried to make it seem lighthearted and playful, like, hey man, how's it going? I didn't want to make a scene since I was a gringo. I didn't want to seem like an ugly American. This went over and over down the whole path, and he gets close. I'd shove him again. He'd come close. Finally, my friend and I came to a fork in the path, and we went one way while they went the other. After we got to the house of some people we knew, we told them about the 2 guys. I was so focused on protecting myself I didn't even notice much of what was happening with the other guy. They said, oh, everyone around here knows him. That's his routine. He comes up to people, pretends to be friendly, puts his arm around them, then pulls out a knife and stabs them in the stomach. Guys, I was that close to getting stabbed in the stomach. Story number 6. When I was a kid, I was riding my bike home from a friend's house at sunset. I rode past the community pool, which had been closed for a couple months. There was a car in the parking lot with a guy in it. I didn't think much of it as I continued the trek home. I cut through the local elementary parking lot, which has gates. I get like 20 yards past the gate, and I see the car pull up at the bottom. Thinking that's odd. Anyhow, He backs out away from the gate, and my spidey senses were kind of tingling at this point. I get up to go to school and head towards the teacher parking lot, which is my standard direction. As I'm about to turn the corner, I see headlights from the parking lot. I stop and peek around the corner, and it's the freaking car guy again. I flip my bike around and start going the long way around the school, and he sees me but just gets back in his car and starts driving around the front of the school. I camp in these bushes. Heart pounding, he's slowly driving up and down the front of the school, keeping an eye out for teachers and stuff on the lot. Another car comes down the street and he has to move his dumb car out of their way. And as soon as he does, I just blasted up the street, full tilt, flew my bike into some random open garage. So, here I am, hiding inside of this garage, waiting for him to come around again. But he doesn't. I give it a few minutes, then decide to pop my little head out. Still, no one. Okay, I'm a few blocks from home, and I just gotta go for it. I bust out the bike and start hauling butt home. Not half a freaking block later, this dude turns the corner right there, right in front of me. I just veer my bike into some random lawn and run up to the front door. I look at him and he's just in the street staring at me. So I grip the front door handle, praying to any and every god these people don't lock their doors. I see his reverse lights flicker, and I know he just put it in park. I just rip that door open, run inside, and slam it. Two old people just sitting there, and I look at them, and I'm like, some dude's trying to get me out there. They don't completely believe me because they barely react to what I said, but they don't kick me out or anything either. So, I'm watching the dude from the window, and he's just chilling. Then the grandpa looks dude and gets up from his lazy boy and opens the curtain to look for himself. When he does that, this dude in the car decides to leave. Old guy's like, well, looks like he's gonna leave. I'm like, I'm not leaving for a bit, dude. So I hang out for 10 minutes and, well, no creepy abductor car has been seen. I assume he figured I called the cops, and finally I'm like, I have to get home. This is before cell phones were common for the average person. I hop on my bike, and I swear it felt like I drove 35 miles per hour the whole way home. So I get home, and I tell my parents, and I'm exhausted and completely in shock. They basically just brush me off, and I'm stunned that every adult I interacted with acted like I was the crazy one. I basically never talked about it again. It was so traumatic to talk about at the time. That image of him in his car while I held the door handle to the random house is permanently seared into my brain. To this day, it's still as crystal clear as it happened yesterday, 4K. Like 20 years later, I decided to confront my parents as to why they didn't do anything that day. They were like, dude, what are you talking about? Well, I explained it far better than I could have when I was a kid in complete shock, and anyhow, with the current, more expansive explanation, my mother absolutely broke down. She starts crying at this public restaurant because she saw how serious I was, when I was like, how could you ignore what I said that day? As well as talked about how that morphed my stranger danger techniques for better or worse. Thankfully, I was on the verge of puberty, and ended up becoming a giant human being, so my actual fears diminished quickly, as I could easily defend myself. Until I moved away from that town forever. I looked every day for that freaking car, never to see it again. I would fantasize about what I'd like to do if I ever found that guy. Hell, I still think about it. Story number 7. Hey, I was a bouncer at a club in LA for a minute in the 90s. Stopped some dudes clearly affiliated in a gang at the door after they refused security checks. After a few minutes of their threats and Manson lamps, they left spewing all sorts of warnings. A little later, it starts to wind down, and because it's a little slow and we're overstaffed, I start to drink. I get a bit drunk. Not wasted, but sleepy buzzed, so I tell my buddy I'm going to lay down in the back of his car just for a while. After a few minutes after laying down, I realized I have to pee. I get out, stumble a few into a spot behind a guard gate for a parking lot, and a building for a little bit of privacy. There's a few dozen people milling around in the front of the club. So I'm about 25 feet away from the club's entrance and just off of an alleyway. While I'm there relieving myself, a dude runs right past in front of me, and the guard booth to my rear, and absolutely unloads a 9mm. It was recovered rounds from the backseat, trunk, and roof bumper into the backseat of the car I just crawled out of. Bam, 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 unloading into the car. He then turned, runs right back past me and down the alley into the night, and I don't think he saw me at all. Nothing really came of it except my partner was convinced I was a marked man and refused to be near me for a year or so.